Thanks, Eric. It's great to be here with all these who's and friends and to talk about something that our panelists are really deeply involved with, name, image, and likeness in college athletics. As Eric mentioned, I'm the co-chair of the sports practice at the law firm of Loeb & Loeb, and I do a fair amount of work in the college, and I'll use the abbreviation NIL for name, image, and likeness in the college NIL space, representing college athletes and brands and collectives and others who are in that space. So I get to see all of this from the legal perspective, and our panelists get to see it from 3 different perspectives, which I think will really help inform the discussion today. So what I'm going to do is just a brief introduction on where we are with NIL to get us all on the same page for the discussion today. And then I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. And then we'll go into a discussion about what's currently happening in NIL and where our panelists see things going. So let me just set the stage talking about the topic for today of name, image, and likeness. And the brief history is that this space really didn't exist until just under 2 years ago. When we talk about NIL, it's very recent developments that is even continuing to develop. The NCAA for many years actually sought to preserve the principle of amateurism. And their view of that was that collegiate athletes were prohibited from earning any money based on essentially the exploitation or their use of their name, image, and likeness, or really anything that was connected to the sport that they participated in college. All that changed in June of 2021, when the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, a very rare 9-0 decision in the Alston case, held that the NCAA could not prevent student athletes from monetizing their name, image, and likeness. Essentially, the NCAA had been forced into a corner. And when they were then, by the Alston decision, required to face the new reality of name, image, and likeness, what they did was issue guidelines about how what regulations would apply. But really, they left most of the regulation and they left most of the enforcement of those regulations to state laws, where there were state laws. Not all states had state laws governing name, image, and likeness. They left the regulation and the enforcement to university policies. So there is a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty there. And that's in a lot of ways continued to be the case over the last 2 years or so. And the NCAA was also forced to do this because there were laws that had been passed in states, namely Florida and California and a number of others right behind them, that would have prevented the NCAA from essentially punishing any student athletes in those states who decided to monetize their name, image, and likeness. So beginning July 1, 2021, and since then, it has been a brave new world for college athletes, for university administrators, for state legislatures, for brands, really for many others in this NIL ecosystem. And what we've seen over that time is a lot of construction of what NIL really means in terms of the regulation and the enforcement and the kinds of deals that are being done. But we've also seen some tearing down of what was initially constructed. We've seen some rebuilding of what had initially been constructed, and a lot of modification along the way. The NIL landscape continues to change and evolve. We now have collectives that have come to the fore, and one of our panelists, Lo Davis, will be talking from that perspective. We've seen a lot of creative development in the NIL deals that are happening, and we see a lot of continued evolution in the NIL space. So with that very brief history over the last 2 years, we're going to move forward and talk about the current state of NIL, what the existing challenges are, and then what the future developments are likely to be in that space. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll go from there with the discussion about the relevant topics. So I have Lo Davis first. So why don't we have Lo kick it off?
Yeah, thanks you, Brian. My name is Lo Davis. I am a graduate of the university, class of 91. I'm the executive director of CAV Futures and CAV Futures Foundation. I've been sitting in this chair, I guess it was a year ago, March, and really excited to be part of this panel and educating folks on NIL and especially how we do it here at Virginia. So thank you, Brian.
Great, thanks, Lo. Next, Stephanie Garcia.
Hi, everyone. I'm a double who class of 2010 and 2012. I was a track and field student athlete. I competed in the steeplechase, was an All-American ACC champion, and then went on to be a professional track athlete for 10 years, sponsored by New Balance. So I can see a little bit of the sponsorship and deal-making side of NIL, although I didn't get to participate in it. I'm a member of the board of CAV Futures, and I currently work for Collegiate Sports Associates, which is an executive search firm within college athletics. Actually, former Virginia AD Craig Littlepage is one of our senior advisors. And so I've been following NIL ever since it began. I was previously working in news media covering this space, and there is a lot of change, and it's very exciting.
Great. And Cecil White.
Hi, everyone. First and foremost, apologies. I'm here in the airport, actually headed to go see one of our college athletes. So right on cue in that respect. My name is Cecil White, class of 2015, McIntyre School of Commerce. I'm currently an agent, a talent agent at William Morris Endeavor, which is a subsidiary of Endeavor, just a large publicly traded sports and entertainment conglomerate. My job is to create endorsement deals and brand partnerships, business ventures, and facilitate other ancillary businesses for our athletes. So prior to a couple of years ago, that was limited to professionals. And now, given the amazing history provided by Brian, that now includes student athletes. So I've represented over 10 student athletes across the Power Five, across all sports. Excited to chat with you guys today.
Great. So Cecil, let's actually keep it with you. And the first question, very broad question, and that is, so over the last 2 years, what's the reality of NIL? There have been a lot of media narrative about NIL, positive, negative, and otherwise. What's the reality from your perspective about the effect of NIL versus what the media tells us about it?
I like to tell people I think NIL is really the tale of two athletes, right? There's the 1% of student athletes who are really what we all know, just kind of symbolically attending college. And these are professional athletes, future professional athletes who up until very recently have had no other options to reach the peak of the professional sport without attending college. And that's namely, the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB. And so you have those student athletes who are, kind of using college as a stepping stone, to get to the pros. And NIL for them is a lot different. That's where you see the seven figure endorsement deals, the sneaker deals, the beverage deals, partnering with financial services companies, large multinational conglomerates that are using their real media and sponsorship budgets to support student athletes. A lot of those funds go towards supporting that 1%. And then there's the 99%, the student athletes who may have aspirations to go pro, but in all likelihood will not. Again, there's still opportunities for them on the branding side. They're just mainly facilitated through marketplaces. So you hear about Market Price, you hear about a lot of different platforms that are connecting brands with these student athletes on a more granular level. That's where you see more, 4-figure, maybe low 5-figure deals. And these student athletes are mainly servicing almost as like influencers, right? And so, you still have that 1% that have strong social followings. They're still going to get deals predicated on that. But a lot of brands are also seeing it as partnering with those athletes as, the opportunity to get in early, right? So if you are a future number one pick, a future top 5 pick in the NBA, you happen to have 10,000 followers and you attend, University of Kansas, you still have a shot of getting that Adidas deal because Adidas wants to make sure they lock you up before you get to the NBA. So I always like to say it's the tale of the two athletes. I would also just say across both of them, this whole proliferation of collectives has been incredibly impactful for both of those student athletes, I would say. Not only for those athletes that are going to be in college for the long term, but also the short term. There's a lot of collectives doing it right, that the schools are supporting. And then there are those collectives that are more upstarts. And I'm sure there's no one better to speak on that than Lo, so I'll leave that to him. But Brian, those are just my brief thoughts.
Okay, that's great. And Stephanie, let's go to you because I think you're ready to jump in. Former collegiate student athlete, you did not have NIL back in the day, so you can understand from that perspective, but you see it from a different perspective now at Collegiate Sports Associate. So give us your thoughts on sort of the current state of NIL, fact versus fiction.
Well, I think one big media narrative, as Cecil is speaking to, is that all of these athletes are getting seven-figure deals. They're becoming millionaires. They're getting flashy cars. But the reality is that, yes, 99% of them are not. There are the handful of athletes that are not interested in NIL at all. They are here to be scholar athletes. They have their plates full. I mean, I think about my time as a track student athlete. I was a double major. I had an internship, all of these things. And of course, practice. So there just probably wasn't going to be time to finish my papers, let alone, become a social media influencer. So there are plenty of athletes out there who just aren't interested in it, and that's okay. And the other big thing about NIL is that it's an opportunity for kids to be creative. I've spoken to a lot of folks at the Ivy League schools, and obviously sometimes it's a different kind of student, much like the students we have at UVA. And a lot of those aren't becoming influencers. They're starting their own businesses. They're entrepreneurial. NIL gives students an opportunity. If they want to go and play a music gig on a Friday night, they can publish a novel on Amazon, those kinds of things that before, even though it wasn't related to their sport, they still weren't able to do it because of that appearance that, is this because you're an athlete? That's not allowed. So what I love about NIL is it gives student athletes the opportunity to, create something new for themselves. It doesn't have to just be brand endorsements.
And so let me go to Lo, and you've heard a number of points that Cecil and Stephanie raised are what you deal with every day with CAV Futures. Just give us an overview of what is a collective, what does CAV Futures do, and where does it fit within what we're talking about here, the NIL space, and then we can talk about some of the creativity that Stephanie mentioned too.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, CAV Futures was started about a year ago. And for us, we knew that we had to exist in this space here at Virginia. And the way that we wanted to do it in a way that matched up with our morals, our beliefs, our visions, and our values here at Virginia. So while people talk about the Wild Wild West and what's happening with some of these other schools, we stayed true and we stayed directed in how this would work and how it would fit our Virginia student athletes. And, as Cecil mentioned, there's only really the top 1% that truly benefit from meaningful revenue from this. And our whole mentality is, how can we help not only the 1%, but the other 99%? And we believe that in terms of our collective, if you will, it's about being a marketplace. And that marketplace means bringing student athletes into that marketplace to meet up with individual and corporate partners and hope that some meaningful and compliant transactions take place. I also say with CAV Futures, it's beyond just creating the revenue and the marketing. We want to be able to use the student athlete's name, image, and likeness. So whether you're the point guard on the basketball team or the third string on the field hockey team, everyone has value. Everyone in their name, image, and likeness has value while you're wearing the V-Sabres. And so our goal is how can we get you in the network? How can we get you in the right room for short-term, but better yet, long-term success? And I always say, whether you go and you play professionally for a year, 10 years, 20 years, or you make $100,000 or $1 million, we want you to be in that network. And so it's been very important for us to be compliant, to do this the right way, and to really stay dialed in and stay focused on how we can assist UVA student athletes, not only build their brand, but identify what the future may hold, and then ultimately give back to the institution and make a difference in the community.
So, Lo, let me just ask a follow-up question there. Tell our audience first what it means to be compliant. Obviously, that's a very key thing for CAP Futures and hopefully other collectives as well. What do you have to be compliant with? And then tell us a little bit about the creativity that you're using, because, you know, again, like you said, not everybody is the point guard on the basketball team or the quarterback. What type of creativity do you use for those, we'll call them the 99%, but maybe it's more the student athletes in the non-revenue generating sports or otherwise? What creativity do you use to get them in the pipeline and help CAP Futures benefit them?
So if I could say two things quickly. One, we're not a Venmo account to student athletes. So there takes a significant amount of work for us to put together opportunities, whether it's traditional marketing or community engagement, in order for our student athletes to complete that task to get paid. So there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes. The second thing is that, you know, we want to be able to be in a position that no matter what and how the rules change, we don't want to create any red flags for any of our student athletes, the university, and so forth. So to answer your question, Brian, there's a lot of work that goes into it. The first thing we want to do is get as many student athletes into our marketplace as possible. We don't do exclusive agreements with student athletes, but the more that we can have access to them, the more of the opportunities that we can bring, if it fits, right, with outside resources, whether it's through traditional brand partners or community partners. The other thing that we are able to do is we're able to utilize student athletes to promote the CAP Futures brand. And so whether it's through building original content through our subscription services model or promoting a community event through our foundation, we're able to put together, whether it's social media posts, events, merchandising, all of those things that student athletes must complete the task in order to get paid. So there has to be meaningful quid pro quo. I also say, and I know it goes on with some other collectives, is that it has to pass the sniff test. And I always use the scenario, while there is no true market value, we want to make sure that it does pass that sniff test. So we can't have one of our men's basketball student athletes go to a birthday party and pay them $50,000 for just showing up. That's not what we believe in, and that's not meaningful. And again, we think that is something from a compliance standpoint. We don't want to give the university any worries on that end.
Lo, one more follow-up, and then we'll move on. Just give us an overview of what student athletes is CAP Futures working with. We know probably a number of basketball players and football players, but what other student athletes are a part of CAP Futures?
Yeah, so you mentioned men's and women's basketball. We've just started working quite a bit with our football program. But the good thing about CAP Futures is that when we were founded, day one, we talked about being sport and gender equitable. And so I just got a report a couple of days ago. We've worked with over 18 different sports teams and close to 100 student athletes in some way, shape, or form with a transaction. So it's been very important for us to educate our donors and our fans and even the administration that we're not just a collective built around our revenue sports, that it's also important for us to work with all student athletes, all genders. And I think it's been impactful so far.
I want to chime in really quickly and just give one more shout out to Lo and CAP Futures, because one big criticism for a lot of collectives out there in the media narrative world is that they are just focused on the revenue generating sports, football and men's basketball. And there are some collectives and schools out there where that is true. The issue there is that these collectives are not governed by Title IX the way that an athletic department is. They don't have to be equitable. They can just be formed just for men's basketball or for football. And so it's really important, ethically that some of these collectives out there like CAP Futures are really available and accessible for all student athletes, so that the field hockey players, the women's soccer players can benefit from the partnerships that CAP Futures or other collectives can facilitate for them.
Brian, can I give one example?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
what's happened with us. So we have a live radio show that we partner with the Charlottesville Radio Group called the CAF Future Show. And at one of our shows, we had a young lady by the name of Ashley Anumba, who is on our track and field team. And Ashley is a graduate student getting ready to graduate from law school. And most people on this call and probably in our world had never heard of Ashley. But when we had her on the show, her story was so telling and so unique that we just so happened to have two attorneys in the audience that night. And both of them came to her in between segments, gave her their business card and said, when you graduate, call me. So that's a prime example of using a student's NIL to benefit themselves for the long term. So I just wanted to throw that in there, Brian.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. And Cecil, maybe that touches on some of the things that you're doing with the clients that you're representing. But what's your goal when you have the student athletes, whether they be whatever sport they might be from? Are you trying to just help them get a few dollars into their pocket now, or are you starting them with the process of really turning them into a brand down the road?
My goal, and I think the goal of our agency, is to build business. While people are throwing around really interesting numbers for NIL, a rookie in the NBA makes $6 million a year if they're recruited in the bottom of the top 10, right? So getting paid $1 million to go to Auburn or Georgia or what have you, I mean, it's immaterial if it means diminishing your brand or partnering, more relevantly, partnering with local donors or regional donors or corporate sponsors that don't really align with your long-term values or your business objectives. It just isn't worth diminishing your IP in the long term. So for us, first and foremost, NIL is an opportunity for us to engage with athletes that we want to represent for the next 3-4 decades earlier. That's it. We're not here for the upside that they experience in college. It's a recruiting mechanism, and it's a way for us to add value while they're in this for most of our clients, very short period playing college sports. So I will say to Stephanie's point, for our women athletes, it's a little more important because on the basketball side, which is primarily where we play in women's athletics, they have to stay 3 years. For anything else, like we represent track athletes, we've got Olivia Dunn at LSU, who's a gymnast. She's staying 4 years, right? So it's even more difficult to kind of build that brand over the long term versus men's basketball, where they're going to be in college for 6 months, and football, where they can leave after a few years as well. But our goal is to really set the building blocks for a brand business to sustain them. I also think Stephanie made a great point around other ways of monetizing their brands outside of endorsement deals. We've got athletes getting paid to be guest broadcasters on ESPN and Turner who want to be broadcasters one day. We've got aspiring investors who are getting paid to work at VC funds as ambassadors for the funds while they're in school. So, the way that we build these businesses is not as contrived as I think most people want them, or most people think when they say, oh, this person has an agent. And we certainly as agents don't get excited about getting 20% of what could be $1 million NIL portfolio when we could be getting 4 or 5% of 8 figures in most cases, in the future. So for us, we tread lightly. We don't want to do a ton of deals. We want to be strategic and smart about how we're helping our clients during the period.
And I think a big part of that, and a lot of the clients that I represent, their part of their NIL value is based on social media. Some athletes really are able to use social media very effectively and build their following and become even more valuable as influencers or NIL endorsers. So Stephanie, how does that relate? What are you seeing with the impact of social media on NIL? Because it's not always just about, are you the star athlete? It can also be about your social media presence.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. Number one, again, speaking to the power of NIL for the 99%, everyone is a hometown hero. If you're a student athlete at the Division I level at a Power 5 like Virginia, very likely your hometown, your high school peers, they still follow you, they cheer you on. So if you're not one of those athletes that can get those national deals, the Gatorade, All-State commercials, you can still kind of go back to your hometown and get a deal with a local business or brand there that can still be pretty meaningful. When it comes to the idea of branding, I think a lot of us, myself included, and I'm not that far out from being in college, but I think we assume that college students nowadays really are super savvy with social media and branding. And the reality is they're not all. There's so many questions that I've heard from student athletes at the Power 5 level that say, I don't know where to start when it comes to building a social following. It's just not, they're not all TikTok stars. It's hard to believe, but it's true. And so I think what's really important when it comes to NIL is the education factor. And so for the schools, for the collectives, a big part of this that the media doesn't talk about is that there is an education portion. They do need to have financial literacy and the opportunity to learn about how to brand themselves. And I know that's something that Virginia takes really seriously. So it's tough. I think that, again, back to the media narrative, a lot of folks assume that these students just know what to do. And the reality is a lot of them don't really know where to start.
And part of that is that for some of the student athletes, some of them, and we won't talk about high school athletes who are also eligible for NIL in a number of states. With the college athletes, 18 years old, 20 years old, a little bit older than that. So what kind of challenges, Lo, I'll ask you because you're interacting with this whole range of student athletes in that age range, on a daily basis. What challenges does that pose in the NIL space to dealing with, I can call them college kids who, as Stephanie said, don't have a lot of experience in these issues? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think we've all heard the old adage, you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think student athletes show up and they hear about NIL, but they truly are not doing the background and the research to understand, what it's all about. And I think for those of us, especially those of us who have been in business, not every deal is a good deal. And so really trying to educate student athletes about connecting with brands and partners in their network that is going to bring value to them, as well as you bringing value to the brand partner, is something that we try to educate student athletes on. Contracts is another one. And, we've had several student athletes bring us contracts in which we're like, no, please don't sign, right? And so while we don't corner the market on all things NIL or all student athletes at UVA, we're at least building that trust factor now where certain student athletes are bringing us contracts to review. So I think that's one challenge, is that they're so quick to jump at the money. And I think Cecil had mentioned, is there really value in giving away your IP just to participate, if you will? So that's one thing. I think the second thing is the obligation once you do sign that contract. And so for CAV Futures, we've been very good with following the student athletes from start to finish to make sure that they execute the work and the scope of work in order to get paid. And so that's very important. And then also now with taxes and 1099s and all of those pieces, we had a coach contact us and let us know that a student athlete actually deposited their 1099 in the trash can, even though it said important tax document. They'd never seen one before. And so being able to educate student athletes that, hey, it's better to opt into taxes as a 1099 than to opt out, because you don't miss what you've never had. So again, we have to be mindful that the fact that they are, 17 to 22 to 23-year-olds who have basically, as student athletes, been kind of moved through the system, if you will, when it comes to real life stuff. And so, I've been through it. Stephanie's been through it. All of us have to be mentors. And I am of the mindset that I'm going to tell a student athlete what they need to hear versus what they want to hear. And at the end of the day, that's going to benefit them a lot greater. So I think it's just, it's a combination of those things I just mentioned. And, this year, especially as we get into tax season, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how all of this falls out with, especially those who have made decent money. I guarantee you there have been a lot of extensions filed here over the last month or so, that's for sure.
I kind of want to chime in on this, like a little bit of a tangent, because I see there's some questions about this in the chat. there is not strong data out there. There is not a national database that says this is every deal. And so then we can take it and analyze and really say, this is what the market value is for an offensive lineman or a point guard or what have you. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of different state laws. There's just folks that don't want to share from the athlete side, from the collective side. And so that's the big risk right now. There isn't any federal guidelines, although we're hoping it goes that way. It's tough to know. And so you see these headlines of, is this recruit going to get this $7 million deal just for signing with X school? We can't really verify that. And we can't really say, yes, that's truly market value, because there just isn't the data out there to cross-reference.
So Cecil, what type of issues does that create for you? Because as the agent, well, first of all, you're working with, 18 to 20, 22-year-olds. You might not have expected to do that when you became an agent. You're going to work with athletes who are about to go professional, generally a little bit older. But then how do you establish the value? How do you determine what a good NIL deal is for an athlete?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first you just kind of have to bifurcate. So unfortunately, we're not in the era of pay to play yet. So when you hear someone got paid to go play basketball or football at whatever school, it's intrinsically inaccurate. And it's usually a collective deal, if I'm being frank, a collective deal that is rumored to be priced wherever, where that collective is telling a parent or a student, we think that in corporate sponsorships, your child can make up to this number if they are in this market, and we have the ability to help them procure some of these deals. Now, the media runs with it, and then it's, oh, this quarterback got $4 million to go to Texas, right? And in many of those cases, if I'm being perfectly honest, as the agent, you're like dispelling rumors, because most of those kids don't get paid at all from the sponsors. It's a wink and a nod. There's no documentation. There's more than likely not a formal agreement. And it's a coach or someone telling a parent something that just gets spun out of context, or a collective executive, or whatever it may be. And so a lot of our job is dispelling those rumors, as Stephanie alluded to. The other part is, on the actual deal side, helping frame opportunity costs. What does taking a deal that cuts you off in this category mean for future deal flow? What does it mean to take equity in the place of cash? What does it mean to get a revenue share versus a flat payment? What does it mean for someone to say, oh yeah, you get 50% of your payment upon execution of a contract, but these are corporations, so you have to send an invoice, and how long does it take to process an invoice? And then paying taxes on that money and all the things. So there's an education piece that's intrinsic to it. But I think we treat these endorsement deals from a valuation standpoint the same way we do with professional athletes. A lot of it is based on social following. A lot of it is based on media reach. We have an analytics team that puts together very robust data for all of our clients that say, here's the advertising value of working with this athlete. If you put a student in front of it, whatever, like here's their reach on social, here's the amount of time they're mentioned on traditional media, be it on the news cycle or in print media or out of home, whatever. And so you're able to justify it. And the thing is, to Stephanie's point, we actually do have market intelligence because we've been doing this for 100+ years. So when we go to Beats by Dre and Nike and Gatorade and Under Armour and all these brands to go talk about a Chet Holmgren, for instance, we have track record of knowing where their budgets are and how much they pay for comparable athletes because of the other business that we've done with them. So when people say, well, why would a college athlete sign with an agent? A lot of it is because we do have that market intelligence. And, I would say there's student athletes now that in true brand endorsements, dollar for dollar, not quid pro quo, like services agreements, are making more than professional athletes with endorsements. And it's because of their reach. Ironically, Steph mentioned a lot of the student athletes that don't know how to use social. A lot of them do. And the ones who do are unbelievable. Like, Livy Dunn will probably never play a professional sport, and her TikTok reach and following will make her the highest grossing endorsing athlete, whether she's collegiate, pro, or just sits on the couch all day. And it's just a truth. It's the God's honest truth. And if you're a brand, what you're paying for is that reach, that hopefully turns into conversion and brand awareness and all the things. So, I would say don't underestimate, the value and reach that the students, athletes, some of them have on social media. But a lot of our job in terms of valuation and market pricing is using precedent knowledge going into deals.
So, Lo, when you're talking with a student athlete, maybe they're a first year, just getting into the NIL space, do you have a discussion with them about social media and how that can affect their brand? Is that part of the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just like anything else, education is key. And so we talk to student athletes about what their goals are with their social media. And for example, if you have a baseball student athlete and you don't have any pictures of yourself performing your sport, then we need to at least start to get an identifier out there. So we start to educate them on that. We also we talk to student athletes about their stance and their platform, and they have to be willing to put themselves out there for what they believe in. And if they have a certain stance on certain things, it may be something that they're passionate about, but it certainly may be something that a brand partner or a corporate sponsor may not believe in. So you have to be willing to, whatever you put on your social media, you have to take ownership. And there may be things that are not so appealing to others, whether you're right or whether you're wrong. And so, yes, it is very important for us. A lot of our student athletes are still going through identifying what their social page looks like, and they're building on that. And then as opportunities happen, especially with brand partners and some of the community work that we're doing, they're starting to put that on their social platform, which is also helping to create additional brand awareness. And so it's a little bit of a challenge because, again, at the end of the day, you have a lot of student athletes that value what we say, but then we have a lot of student athletes that still want to do it their way. And again, with NIL, like anything else, you get out of it what you put into it.
It also seems that I can just speaking for a little bit of personal experience with some of the college athletes that I've worked with, that charitable endeavors or whatever cause they might have, that's a big part of it. Is that part of the discussion with them? I imagine that you're trying to understand who they are as a person, and some of them it's forming a charitable foundation so that they can do work in that way or other things like that. Is that part of the NIL discussion?
It is. What's your passion, right? What do you believe in? What do you want to accomplish? Who do you want to help? What are your end goals? And we do, Brian, we ask every student athlete who wants to work with CAF Futures, we ask them to sign up in our database, and we speak to every single one of them. And so just because you sign up into our database doesn't mean we guarantee you anything other than putting you in the network. And so for us, it's really good to get an understanding of who they are and what their end goal is before we even take them to a brand partner or into the community. And every student athlete is different, and that's what makes it unique. I'm biased. I think we're all probably biased on this call here. We have extremely smart, passionate, intelligent student athletes. And I think Stephanie mentioned earlier, not everyone is into making a tweet for $200, but if they want to be be with a group of people to make a difference and make a difference in the community and make a difference in their lives, then CAF Futures is still the right place for you to be. And so, yeah, we do a lot of getting to know those student athletes, and it's not all about how much money we can get you. And
Cecil, from your perspective, how much does it come up when you're working with athletes, maybe recruiting them? Yeah. About what their interests are, whether they're interested in doing good things, charitable endeavors, or other causes that they have. Is that how important is that to the student athletes?
It's crucially important. These, once again, these folks are multi-hyphenates. They grew up in the LeBron James more than an athlete era. So simply saying, hey, we can help you vet brand deals doesn't attract folks to us. I can speak specifically for my agency. I think part of our recruiting pitch is that we are a Hollywood agency. So when it comes to building content, non-scripted content, we do it. We have a foundations team that has 10 professionals that can help them set up donor advised funds, help bake in charitable contributions into their brand deals. We build out basketball camps and football camps for our clients who have the desire to do that. We have boots on the ground operational capability there. In many cases, we as an agency write checks alongside our clients when it comes to donating to certain foundations that they're passionate about. So that's something. PR is there. So yeah, I mean, we're signing the whole person, and that includes their passion areas and their interests. And for a lot of the clients we're signing, they want us to go chase the brands that they're passionate about, not the brands that are reaching out to them. And in order to do that, we have to understand who they are and what they're passionate about.
So we've heard a lot from these three different perspectives. There's a lot going on with NIL. We're talking about brands, we're talking about student athletes who have different backgrounds, different interests. We have a lot of the financial part of it about what deals are available, how does social media impact that. So Stephanie, let's look at this maybe we'll just pull back a little bit, we'll zoom out. We've got a lot of these different stakeholders in the NIL space. We've got colleges and universities, we have brands, we have the media, we've got the student athletes, we've got collectives. How do these all work together? Or maybe they don't, or what's the current situation with all those, and what can we do to harmonize everything if we can?
I think the big buzzword here is alignment. There has to be alignment between the university, the athletic department, the collective, the student athlete, and then all of these other outside entities, whether there's individual agents, marketplaces, other branding, people that help with branding and content creation. We've seen Power 5 schools, I'm not speaking about Virginia, but some schools that don't have any alignment, and there is major conflict there. I'm thinking of a school in the Big Ten where the collective was very upset because they were not, the athletic department was not providing them with contact information for their donors. And this collective said, well, how can we reach out to them? And the school said, sorry, we're not going to give that to you. And there was a big hubbub in the media about that kind of tension. And in my mind, how are they going to be able to support the student athletes if they can't have that kind of alignment and cohesiveness? On the other side, we see some Power 5 schools, I'm thinking about one in the Pac-12, where their fundraising arm and their collective really work hand in hand. And that's really helpful. Not all, not all development offices want to work with the NIL collectives. And that again, it makes it more of a competition between who's going to donate to the school and who's going to donate to NIL. And are we going to steal donors from each other? That's not going to lead to success for the student athletes. And that's at the end of the day, what really matters. So really, when we see schools that are from top to bottom really can align with the mission, the values, that's where we're going to see success.
So Lo, from your perspective, what does alignment look like, and how can we get there if we're not currently there?
Yeah, I think Stephanie hit the nail on the head. For us, we took a year of being a third-party organization and trying to align ourselves with what we think is the vision of our athletic department and our university. And we were very intentional and deliberate in doing so that we could have a seat at the table when we were allowed to do so. And so when the rules changed, last October and November, that allowed the institution to have more of a, instead of an arm's length relationship, more connectivity with collectives, we proved that we were doing things the right way. And so we've been really having discussions over the last several months that how can we continue to be, as I say, this and organization and not an or. And so we're having donor conversations, and what we don't want to do is take away from the important needs of the university. But we also want to talk about that NIL is this new piece of the college landscape that is a part of it, and it's important. And so how can we, together with the university, with the VAF, work together to support our cause? And our goal is if we can have donors and we can have people that want to support on the NIL front, maybe we will attract new people to the table that we can then bring back to the athletic department and help in their cause, whether it's through scholarships and other operational funding or what have you. So we do look at this as a team sport, and the rules have changed over the last several months that will allow us to work hand in hand. One thing with CAF Futures, we just recently announced our partnership with the university. So we're an official sponsor of the University of Virginia Athletics. So this coming fall, you will see a lot of CAF Futures around our in-venue, in communication, on the radio shows, all of those things. And really, that's a big part that's going to help get out the education to the masses versus our 1,700 plus social media followers. But it's also going to allow the university to have a vehicle to get that NIL support and be able to have our donors and our fans feel good about it. So I think we're absolutely moving in the right direction. And through that comes communication. And again, I go back to that word compliance. And that's important for all of us to stay at the table together.
One other thing I wanted to bring up is that, and a couple of people have addressed this in the chat, there is still not a national standard for NIL. So state by state have different rules. There are some states where a coach cannot hold your phone to take a picture of you posing with your Gatorade bottle for a deal. And then there are some states where the school can support and can provide branding help and content creation for student athletes. I don't believe that there is a state yet where the schools can actually bring a deal to a student and say, here you go, here's the, AutoZone wants to have this deal with you and we'll make the contract for you. But there are places where it's kind of going a little bit in that direction, and that might cut out collectives. And so all that's to say is that one big issue with NIL is that there are no standard rules. And so that's a challenge, especially when you think of it from the athlete perspective and you're going on your recruiting visits in 5 different states. This is now a question that you have to have is which one is going to support my NIL endeavors the best way.
Right. So no question, part of the recruiting process. So we're getting close to the end. So if we have time, we'll answer some of those questions in the chat, but maybe just a wrap up question or two. Take out your crystal ball. What's ahead for NIL? What are we going to see? Federal legislation? Is it going to continue to go in the direction that Stephanie just mentioned, where universities are going to have more direct involvement? Are there going to be more brands coming into the space? There are going to be more obstacles. Where do we think it's going? Let me go to Lo. What does Lo's crystal ball tell us about where NIL is going? Whether it be the things I mentioned, federal legislation, more brands coming in, universities being more involved. Where are we headed?
All of the above. I think NIL is here to stay. It's going to look different probably 6 months from now, a year from now, but it's here to stay. It's part of college athletics. I do think that there has to be true governance over NIL that will allow everybody to play on the same playing field. The one thing that we know, those that have not played by the rules in the past, I don't think that's going to change, whether NIL is legal or not. And so, but at least we all want to be in a situation where we know that there's governance and there are penalties for people that are not playing by the rules. So, 5 years from now, could we be closer to pay for play? I'm hearing that on the streets. I don't know if I agree with that per se, but certainly I do support student athletes. I support their ability to make money. One thing I always say, Brian, is that I love my UVA degree. I hug it all the time, but it didn't allow me to get a meal or go to a movie or go home. So, when people have these concerns and questions and criticisms of student athletes earning a little bit of money, it's not the millions of dollars that's glamorized on the internet. It's certainly the hundreds or the few $1,000s that will allow our student athletes to have the confidence to go out and do things in their community and while they're here at school and enjoy. So I just feel like here again with CAF Futures in Virginia, we're going to do it the right way. And no matter what those rules look like 5 years from now, we're going to be respected and we will do well. And we'll outlive some of those folks that are trying to buy recruits and recruiting classes.
So from my perspective, a couple thoughts. One, I think we'll certainly see the federal government get involved, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but soon. The NCAA has a new president, Charlie Baker, who was the former governor of Massachusetts. And the thought is he was brought in to really facilitate some of this help and connection with the federal government for several issues, including, are student athletes ever going to be classified as employees, which is a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down. But certainly that's a question mark on the horizon related to NIL. Secondly, we're only in year 2, or we're not even finished with year 2 yet. So there's going to be a lot of change and evolution in what NIL really looks like. I'd like to see more of this entrepreneurial spirit, more VCs, student athletes as VCs, and starting, their own companies and brands and innovating. We probably will see more big brands get into the space. A lot of these big brands, they're gun shy. They didn't want to jump in month 1 of NIL because they wanted to see, is this really going to work? Can we trust 18-year-old student athletes to fulfill the contracts? We saw after the first football season, there were some big names who had big NIL deals that didn't play, that got injured. And the way NIL works is, those contracts, they couldn't not pay the kid if they didn't play, because that would, go against the quid pro quo. I can never say that phrase. That would go against the spirit of NIL. And so I think we will see more big brands get in. I think that we're going to see some innovations from the student athletes. And I think that the federal government is going to have to come in and try and set some standards, because as it stands right now, it is a little still wild west, and we're not sure what the truth is when it comes to, these big name recruits. And I'd like to see more of, again, the 99% really get in there and participate and benefit from NIL if that's what they want.
Right. So a lot continues to be on the horizon and see how it all develops. Just mindful of our time. And Eric, do we have any questions? I think we do in the chat. Maybe if we have time to at least cover one of them before we go into our networking sessions.
I think we've got a lot of great questions. I'm gonna definitely do a follow-up afterwards and list them out, follow-up for our panelists to touch base on. Would like to address one, and Lo, I think you're going to be the best one, where you've got a couple questions came in specifically to UVA and that relationship with VAF, and understanding the career progression. I think you're going to be able to speak perfectly to that. But how does that relationship work when it comes to, say, CAV Futures, NIL, and VAF?
Yeah, so again, I think it's one of those situations now where we look at NIL as part of the overall picture of success for athletics. And for us, it started again when we were allowed to sit at the table with our department or with the department and discuss, what does this look like, right? Because we don't want to send out any type of confusing messages. And again, we're just getting started with this. So I think the messaging to the donors will be a lot clearer come this fall when we're able to have more of an amplified voice. But, with the VAF and with the university in general, they can talk about NIL all day long. They can actually even go with me out on a visit to meet with donors. But what they can't do legally is to ask donors for money for a particular sport or a particular student athlete. And so really, it's more of, right now, it's about education. It's about sending donors who have questions or interest in supporting NIL to me and to CAV Futures. And so this whole process is really just new, but we're in communication. We're working well together, and we're actually having some successful conversations as a result of the VAF sending over people who have interest in NIL.
We have come to the end of the hour, and I just want to say thank you again. Brian, thank you for leading the conversation, the discussion there. Lo, Stephanie, I know Cecil had to pop off, but thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight of what you are seeing around this space. So thank you again.